All right. So Matt Payne here with Tim Parkin. We're the two of the co-founders of the Natural Landscape Photography Awards. And every year we try to do some video critiquing of some of the images that were submitted in the prior year. And so we reached out in our newsletter and we asked people to respond if they wanted some of their images critiqued. And we got a pretty healthy response to that email. I want to say it was like what, 40, 45 people who said, yeah, please critique my work. So obviously we're not
Yeah,
going to have time to do
54, in fact.
54. Yeah. So we're not going to have time to do all of those, but we've picked out randomly a handful of people and we'll try to get through as many images as possible. And if we have time in the future, we'll hopefully maybe do another one of these critique videos. But yeah, so without further ado, let me just kind of preface a few things. So Tim and I haven't spent any time talking back and forth about these images before today. So we're going to be critiquing them and responding to them kind of in real time, which is how we do judging anyway. It's kind of fun that way. I will also say that judging is kind of an art form that, the more I do it, the better I get at it. And offering critique is part of doing the judging process. And we always try to preface things with things that we enjoy about the photo and things that we would like to see improved or things that maybe would make the photo a little bit more impactful for the competition. And it's always important to talk a little bit about kind of how difficult it is to pick winning images out of 15,000 submitted images. And maybe Tim, you can talk a little bit about the judging process from your perspective and how that becomes really challenging when you get 15,000 images and
Yeah, yeah.
3,000 of them are amazing. So then how do you pare it down? So why don't you take it off from there?
Yeah, sure. We use Lightroom because it's what people are familiar with as far as judging goes, and it makes it a very quick process to be able to go through things and, more importantly, come back to things later, which is a key part of the judging process. So typically, when we get all the images together, we'll get, like I say, 10 to 15,000, quite a lot. You're not going to be able to spend a lot of time on each image. Generally, though, you can have a good go at categorizing images very quickly as they arrive. So we have a 5-star system just to get us going. And we say 1 star and 2 star, probably not going to, well, the way we categorize it is it's not going to win the competition. So those are 1 and 2 stars not winning the competition. 3 stars, yeah, maybe the judges have all got different tastes. They sometimes surprise you. So these middle ones could stand a chance of placing well, and then the 4s and 5s are ones where you could see, yeah, these stand a chance, proper chance. So that's the broad categorization to begin with, and really the score you stick with at that point are the 1s and 2s. All the other scores get reviewed again and again. So we'll go back after doing all of them, and then come back and look at all the 3s and 4s because the 5s are pretty much, they're good. You had that reaction. So then it's reviewing those 3s and 4s and deciding, do they still stand a chance, or should these really be in the top 4 or 5? And as far as those first rounds go, anything that gets more than 3, I think that's right, or is it more than 4? I can't remember. Anyway, it's definitely 3 or more gets through to the next round. And it doesn't matter how many judges go for that. If there's 4 or 5 of us doing that preliminary, if one of them gives them a score of 4 or 5, it goes through. And which means you can have varied tastes. So some people may score, or 4 judges may score an image is not very good at all. But if one person sees potential in it, it's going to go through to the next round. And that's why we end up with, probably half the images going through to that secondary round. And things change. This is another reason why we're not really set in stone when it comes to the first round. We've seen enough images that don't score well in the first rounds, but we pass through, that after that have gone through to the finals and been placed, that you don't get too obsessed with that process of trying to get everything perfect in the first round. You get them close enough. And a lot of that in those first rounds is about instant reaction. It inevitably can't be anything but that. So that first impression is important. But I'll say, as judges, we get quite good at recognizing potential and trying to overcome our personal tastes. I think that's one of the keys to it.
And it's probably one of the hardest things too, because we have personal preferences that we gravitate towards. So I'm always trying to check those biases when I'm looking at images. Mostly when I'm doing prejudging, though, I'm kind of just trying to eliminate stuff that's pretty obviously got some major technical issues or things that are, uh, for lack of a better term, maybe sloppy in terms of like composition or editing or super over processed or whatever. So I'm trying to get rid of those things. And then after I weed those things out, then I'm going back through with a little bit finer tooth comb and trying to things that I'm really happy with and excited about. And what I think was really good about our process is that if any one of us four prejudges, if like let's say three of us rate something a 2 or a 1, but then Tim's like, this is a 4 or a 5, then we automatically relook at it again. We're like, okay, maybe there's something we missed here. Let's talk through that. So we have a system for developing ways to catch outliers or things that maybe we missed somehow. So I think it's a pretty solid process.
Yeah,
So
and those ones that score the threes, we've gone through all this process and gone and reviewed them just before they get handed off to the judges. We all look at the threes again just to go, do we really want to throw anything else in? It doesn't matter if we throw a few more in. They've got enough as it is. They'll never notice another 50.
right. Well, let's dive in. Let me share my screen here and see what we can do here. So what we've done is we've got a small handful of people who submitted images. We've randomly chosen them out, and we're just going to go through them. I've picked out 3 photos from each person who wanted, and if we have time, we might revisit some other images that are within these catalogs. So the first person that came up is Annette Kelly, and I've pulled out kind of just randomly 3 images that she submitted last year. And the first one is this particular image here. It looks to be like a very serene, tranquil kind of blue hour scene from it's maybe Norway or not totally sure, maybe the
Could be
Alps.
Antarctic, I suppose. Yeah,
Could
Alps.
be. Yeah, it looks like a beautiful scene. The reason why I picked this one out right away is because I think this is one of those photos that shows a ton of promise, and it has kind of what I would describe as like initial impact. Like it's like, wow, look at those colors. You get that beautiful moon. You have the jagged peaks. You have the reflection. You've got this nice composition where things are kind of broken up a little bit in the midground, and these really interesting shapes with the icebergs. And the first thing that I thought when I looked at this image is that I felt like there was a color cast. And it's something that I'm looking for a lot, especially with snow images. Um, you've got this purpley, magenta, vibrant scene. And then for whatever reason, probably just the way it was processed, all of the ice and the snow is then turned magenta, which if you think about it, if that sky was magenta, the mountains that are facing us that are not being hit with that magenta light would not have a magenta color cast, right? They would be a little bit warmer, maybe a little bit less magenta, maybe more on the green side of things, or just pure white. There might be a
Hmm.
tinge of magenta, like reflecting back onto that light with the snow. But for me, that was the first thing I noticed is that I felt like it had a color cast. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, Tim.
Yeah, it's definitely got a hint of magenta going on there, and it's probably worth saying that I've been in situations outside at sunset and twilight this where everything is incredibly magenta,
I know.
but just because it's real doesn't mean it works well in a photograph as well. In this case, I'm looking at some of the edges of the ice in the middle where you're seeing some ice is white and some is magenta, so I'm not sure what's going on there. It looks odd, and I think that's the first reaction, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, and I don't know, I haven't played around with this photo at all, but just one thing that I like to do when I see a cast like this is like, okay, maybe there's a way to correct it just to see if I'm catching something. So I always like to use the white balance eyedropper, and like I know that this snow is probably going to be white-ish, maybe not pure white, but somewhat white. So right there, I'm going to do that. And you can see that it strips out a ton of the magenta, but probably too much, right? So I can
Yeah.
bring some of it back in. And so you can see already like it's a little bit closer to maybe what you would prefer to see in an image like this. Also, you've noticed if you look at the histogram, some of those bright areas have been clipped. So those are just things that I'm looking for when I'm quickly evaluating images, is if maybe the processing's not quite right on, things like
One
that.
of the
But
things
yeah, go
one of the
ahead.
things I'd say about this one as well is it's quite often there's subjects and that get held to a higher standard. If you're going to do pictures of floating ice and mountains at sunset, there's a lot that's instantly impactful, so it works well, grabs people's attention, but loads of people do it. And so as judges here, we're saying, okay, what elevates this beyond just a straight photograph of some ice and mountains, etc. So you start looking at things. Well, okay, that little cluster of ice in the foreground is interesting to me,
Yes.
but it doesn't really play a dominant part in the picture. So it's difficult to say that is a successful part. The sunsets are great; they're always good, but it doesn't make a good photograph on its own. So I think it's one of those where you go, it's a good shot of a really an interesting and impactful subject, but it doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah, and
And that's I see quite often.
there's a few other things that I'm always looking for too. For example, like some masking issues. Like it looks like when the mask was created for the sky, perhaps in Lightroom or in Photoshop, you can see that, which is fine. We allow multiple exposures and things like that, but you can see like the dark edges of this foreground and then the white edges here. To me, that's kind of a telltale sign that the masking is a little bit clumsy. And so a little bit more care to those kind of details like that are going to be really important if you want your photograph to like make it further than the first or second round of judging, right? Because at some point it becomes a task of like, okay, this is a great photo, but like, what are things that it might lack that other photos that are similar to it don't lack. So I think those are things that you have to be really careful about when you're looking at your own work.
As a creative option on this, I mean, I don't know whether we should be giving suggestions, but if you cropped into that single mountain above that cluster of ice, so
This
really
is
tight crop into it,
something like this.
yeah,
Tighter?
even tighter, go tighter, just make sure it's just featuring just those cluster of ice in the foreground and the mountain in the background.
Yeah, gotcha. Something like this.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, there you go.
That becomes more interesting as far as I'm concerned because the photograph has now got a subject. It is about the ice and its relationship with the rest, and you've got that cracked iceberg in the background with a blue interior. So
Yes.
it goes beyond just being a photograph of the glacial ice in a lake at sunset.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Nice one. All right, should we move on to another one of Annette's
Yeah,
images? Okay. So here's one that I picked out for a couple of reasons. Similar to the last photo, I think kind of like initially it has a lot of impact. You've got this beautiful mountain with the freshly fallen snow on it, and then you have this nice contrast with the bright sky and then the foreground trees. But there's a couple of things for me that were immediately stood out as things that could be fairly easily fixed by the photographer to make the image stand out a little bit more. A couple things for me, like these things on the edges. I'm always looking at my edges to make sure there's not things pulling my attention off to the side. So easily we could crop those out. And then again, I'm not sure this side of the image over here adds a lot of value because you have this really interesting foreground and then you have this kind of big, dark, black area on the bottom right corner that takes up a lot of real
distracting.
estate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm always looking for things like that like do they help tell the story of the photograph or is it just a distraction? And of course some of that is subjective, but for me like those don't really help a lot. And then of course you have this really bright area of sky that to me it kind of just pulls me up in there and pulls me away from the rest of the image. So those are things that stood out for me on this kind of initially impactful photograph. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Tim.
Yeah. Two things come out to me quickly. Is one is the sky. It's obviously a very bright background, so that peak is probably almost in shadow because it's so bright behind it, and it's actually taken a massive amount of highlight recovery or masking the whole sky to try and bring detail back into the sky, which makes it look odd. So the instant reaction is doesn't look quite as real as I would expect. The tree at the bottom, it's got some interesting textures, but it's got a problem of not knowing whether it's part of the picture or not. Is
Mm.
it, I want to see more of it if it's going to be part of the picture, or I want it subdued if we're trying to ignore it. And yeah, the little out of focus elements on the left-hand side definitely don't work with it. Uh, and I'd agree with you on the right-hand side, especially things like the little patch of blue in the top right-hand corner, isolate on its own there.
Yeah, that stuff up there. Right, exactly. So, I mean, with all that said, I feel like even with a simple crop, you could improve this photo quite a bit, right? You don't have to do a ton, and already it feels a little bit better. Uh, and play around with the crop to see, like, you could keep a little bit of that stuff on the right and maybe lose some more of this stuff on the left. But I would play around with some of those things just to kind of create some more balance with the composition.
Could you try selecting the sky in the light shop and the Lightroom masking
I can
with your
try. I
crop?
don't
Because I like your crop.
like with this crop.
Yeah.
I can try. I really don't like using Lightroom for this.
And then just
Um,
increase the brightness of the sky. It
like
looks
that.
better with a more natural balance between the sky and the mountain. I think. I'm
Right.
not sure. I'd agree. Obviously, this is a quick hack at doing it.
Right. And
Um,
of course, the flip side could be true as well. Like if you kept the brighter
so
sky, but then left the
have you
mountain a
tried
little bit
darkening
darker.
get rid of the mask and try darkening everything and see if that makes it.
Yeah.
Oh no, leave that mask in. Just go out in mask mode.
You mean just make the whole thing darker? Or you want me
Yeah,
to keep
obviously
the inside?
keep the mask in and then just try that.
All right, hold on.
That's the one, I think.
So you want me to keep the mask
Brighten
like
that up
this
and then
and
darken
then
everything.
darken everything. Got it. Like that.
Yeah, it
Maybe a
starts to
little
look
too dark.
a little too dark, but it starts to look more balanced, as it were.
Right, right, right.
Yeah,
Because you would expect that to be the brightest part. I mean, obviously this is blown out still, but
yeah.
and like you said, it's a pretty quick hack, but I
It's
think
relationships, isn't it? That's what it's about, and balance.
right. And I think there's a tendency, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, but especially early in my photography career, I wanted like everything to have tonality and like everything should be exposed. And oftentimes it's good to remember like shadows do exist in nature, right? Like darker areas and lighter areas. So I think the having the tendency to want to make everything fully exposed is sometimes it can be damaging to the image. Cool. Let's go to the third image that Annette has in here. And I actually really liked this image for a lot of reasons. First of all, like I love the color story here, the blue and the gold. I think blue and gold always work very well together. And I like the flow of the composition that kind of swirls from left to right and from bottom to top. And I like the textures in the water. I think one thing that I would have liked to have seen for this image is perhaps a different use of shutter speed. I'm sorry, not shutter speed, aperture, and of course shutter speed and ISO to compensate. But right now it seems like only this top half is in focus and the rest is really blurry. And
Yeah,
so I would have really liked to have seen more of the either the central part of the image or the entire image itself in focus, which I know I shoot a lot of scenes like this, and that's actually really, really difficult to do because you need an aperture of like f32. And so that means that you're taking your shutter speed to compensate. But with scenes like this, don't be afraid to take your ISO up really high and then just denoise it in Lightroom later. I think that would help a lot in terms of having a little bit more depth and connection to all of those nice textures within the water.
yeah. It's really that bottom row of light out of focus strip that's the most distracting. So I think if you lost the bottom, I don't know, just the bottom bit of the frame there, it would be a lot better.
Yeah, I
Um,
was trying to see
and you
if we
can
could see the settings on it, but I don't, they're not in my metadata. All good.
yeah. Um, so I think that's the biggest thing. And the other one is possibly the blues are a little bit too blue saturated. So backing off
Hmm.
that slightly might work. Another thing I sometimes do with this is to play around with the hue of certain colors. So for instance, the green, the yellow is or the gold is got a green hint to it. So it's possible to just move that hue slightly towards a warmer color. So and that'll take the greens out slightly, just as an option.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, like people watching this are like, I thought you were the natural landscape photography awards and that you don't allow editing. And I think it's important to say that, this photographer chose a certain white balance or let their camera choose a certain white balance. And so dialing in the colors to be representative of your vision and what you actually witnessed is important, but also we do allow some artistic interpretation within reason. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
why
that
we compare
that
the raw files. Like obviously, if the water was gold and you turned it to red, that's maybe not the
yeah.
thing. But if you take
That-
the gold and slightly remove a little bit of the greens, that's completely fine.
It's about not deceiving, isn't it? That's our bottom line. So photographic artistic adjustments are fine as long as you're not deceiving the viewer as to what you've actually photographed.
Right. All right. Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next photographer.
Thanks,
And
Annette.
we've got Barb Livieri, and I picked out three of her images. And the first one is this one, which I really liked uh, the depth of field, and I liked the subject that was selected for this image. I really like this bush with the berries and the subtle colors here are really pleasing, like the reds against the kind of almost like greenish cyan color in the background is nice. For me, one of the reasons I picked this one out is because once again, I think there's a couple of really simple things that could be done to improve the image. This left-hand side has some of these distractions, like this swirl of green and this thing here that's out of focus, and then this little I like to call this like a little interloper here in the bottom left corner. Like if those things were dealt with through a crop or something else, perhaps with contrast adjustment, whatever, I think that would improve the composition significantly.
Or even if they were matched on the other side, so it had a balance. But at the moment, the right-hand side is really ultra clean, so all you're seeing is out of focus. And the
Right.
left-hand side is slightly sharper in terms of the detail, and it has these distractions. So it does look unbalanced because of that.
Yeah, and because this is a 4x5, I'm assuming she cropped it already. So there could be potential in the original raw file for her to find a more balanced composition within the crop.
Mm. My temptation would be just to crop that a lot tighter, so it's literally tight around the in focus subject, and you'd probably get away with those distractions in that way.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're
Yeah,
thinking something
yeah,
like
that's
this.
yeah, or maybe a bit higher. Well, keep
Just
the
to
top
like
bits in, but
give
yeah,
you an idea of what you're talking about though. Yeah. Keep the top bits
and take the
and
right
then
in.
bring this in a little, bring that in a little. There we go.
Yeah,
Feels a little better.
yeah. It's looking around those edges. It feels a bit more cohesive in that
Yeah.
term. And now you've got to focus on the main end focus stem on the left hand side, and it recedes to the right, which is
Right.
quite nice.
Yeah, it's got a nice
But yeah, the
fluff and
textures and colors are lovely. I think this was a borderline choice for the second round, if I remember
yeah.
rightly.
Yeah. All right, nice. Let's go to the next one. So I picked this one out for similar reasons. I really liked the color contrast here. I like the splashes of orange and red and yellow and the green. It's got a really nice harmonious color story going on. A few things that I noticed about this image, I felt like maybe this background probably was a little bit blown out in the highlights, and maybe they pulled the highlights back pretty far to kind of compensate for that. So whenever I see like that gray, or maybe it was a super gray sky, I don't know, but whenever I see brighter areas of the photo like super gray, that tells me that something potentially could have been off with the editing. So when I'm ever exposing scenes like this, I like to super underexpose it so that those brighter areas are perhaps more bluish or a darker grayish color. And then you can pull up the shadows and of everything else later. But those were my initial reactions to this scene. I think everything else feels fairly balanced. And I'd be curious what you think, Tim.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in that top area, that probably the area behind the foliage has been quite bright, so it's been pulled back to try and create it. But it's just gone grey. It's not a bright background, but it's not a subject matter. It's always really difficult, and you can probably see on the left-hand tree where at the bottom of that left-hand orange tree, it's quite bright yellows, but you look at the very top and it's just gone browns,
Hmm.
where the exposure's been reduced.
Right.
And I think this is another case where it's a subject matter that's competitive. There are lots of pictures
Ah,
entered
yes.
of really rich foliage and textural patterns like this. So they end up being held to a lot higher standard because of that. And I imagine if I would have looked at this, it would be that white background that would have made me go, it doesn't quite work. It's not going to match up to what we'll see elsewhere.
Right. And to your point, especially in the intimate landscapes category, which for the last 2 or 3 years has been highly, highly, highly competitive with a lot of really fantastic work, which is exciting and interesting. And it means that like the bar for something to really stand out in that category has become higher and higher, which is exciting, but also challenging for people who enjoy that genre specifically. So, but yeah, spot on, Tim. I think that that's great feedback. What are your thoughts on the saturation of the colors in this one?
I don't think they're too bad. I think there's a couple of issues, as I say, with the darkening in the top part of the picture,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't. There's nothing that makes me react badly there, at least on my
Yeah.
monitor at the moment.
Yeah, and then I guess there was one other thing compositionally that kind of struck me. I was wondering if the photographer took a couple of steps to their right and allowed a little bit more of this nice tree and the trunk behind this yellow to emerge,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
a
you
good
could
feature,
have
isn't it?
yeah, and then you could have a little bit more of a balance. Whereas like I feel like that yellow tree is kind of hiding some of the interesting
Yeah,
parts of the tree
bit of a
behind it.
clash.
Yeah. And who
Uh,
knows,
but
maybe that tree was really, really ugly. I don't know, but
yeah, you never know, do you? The thing I did like about this was that arc of red going across the picture, and
yes.
that was the thing that I liked most, and like you say, that tree behind as well. So
Yep, yep. Overall, though, I think it had a lot of potential, just a few things to make it even better. All right, so the next one from Barb, which of the images that I saw, this was one of my favorites. I really like this image because it's got a lot of interesting juxtaposition and contrast going on. First of all, I know Barb happens to live in Florida, and I'm guessing this is from her local area. And these are palm trees, right? But like it's misty and moody and feels almost feels coldish in a way. So it's got
yeah,
this kind of and almost foggy too. So you've got this foggy kind of juxtaposition on a subject that normally are used to seeing like people drinking mai tais and the sun's out and so I love the contrast there and I love the composition here of it's really nicely well balanced with the foreground and the sky and the trees. So for me, I felt like this was a pretty standout image actually.
it's got a personality, hasn't it? Those figures look like people's heads with wigs on
Yes.
or something, and clustering together. So I always think of street photography when I think of tree pictures like this.
Yeah.
And then the sky above it is interesting because it's obviously a sunny day or a sunset or something. I presume actually probably sunrise with the mist going on there. And I think this just looking at the star rating, it's got 3 stars, so this would have been gone through to the next round anyway. My only distraction here was the hint of the darkness on the far right hand side of the picture.
Oh yes, this
Which
stuff over here.
yeah, it doesn't bother me too much. I might just reduce the contrast of that to make it less obvious. But yeah, it's an interesting picture.
But that's the
But yeah,
idea. It's just to like reduce the amount of distraction that creates. I think that would be helpful for that particular part of the image. And then otherwise, the other thing for me is I feel like the foreground was a little bit too dark. I feel like it could have been brought up just a smidge to give it a little bit more personality.
there's a vignette on it, isn't there? That's just appearing a little bit too obvious, making the corners a little bit black.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So then you just minor stuff that could be easily fixed to make it stand out a little bit more.
One
But
of the
it's
things, one
got
of the things that was tempting me when I looked at this was to say that how could you make the most of these transitions, vertical transitions going on,
mm,
and I was wondering whether a vertical crop of it, so cropping in from the left and right, to make it a picture, obviously about layers, so it's stacked up like a cake.
something like that.
Yeah, just an alternative way of looking at it.
Yeah, I like that.
Those are the
Nice.
parts of the picture that made me most interested, anyway.
Yeah, and it deals with the other problem as well with the stuff on the right hand
Mm.
side. All right. Well, nice job, Barb. Thanks for submitting those. Next, we'll move on to Javier Lafuente. And I picked out a few images from Javier. This is the first one. This is a pretty classic aerial scene from Hanksville area of Utah. I think in that regard, I think you're already yeah, you have a major disadvantage because it's a recognizable scene that has been featured in lots and lots of competitions and awards in the past. I think I've seen different variations of this composition or that feature been awarded in several competitions in the past over the last 10 years. And so for an image of that location with those recognizable elements, it's got to be really stand out. It's got to have a lot of things going on for it that are unusual. I think in this particular image, the composition itself is a little bit brave. It's very right heavy with these two strong elements on the right hand upper corner. And you've got all these nice leading lines with the Badlands formations. Particularly, I really like this channel here with all of the boulders in the black boulders in it that kind of pull you in. I think that's got a lot going for it. And then the other thing that I would say about this image is that I've actually flown my drone here quite a bit, and I feel like the light here is a little bit flat. Probably was taken either on a really cloudy day or before or after sunrise and sunset, where there's not much light. I would have liked to have seen perhaps a color version of this where you have some of that glow that can happen at this scene. I think that's the challenge of submitting images from a very recognizable location, is that people have seen the potential of that place so many times in different other images that it forces you to like automatically you're comparing it against all these other images you've seen before, which makes it even harder for it to stand out. But a couple things I would potentially think about to reduce some of the recognizability factor is, think about a crop where you keep in some of those nice textures, and now you've got a more abstract scene that isn't necessarily from Hanksville. It could be pretty much anywhere in that part of Utah. And maybe take a look at the histogram. You've got a lot of room now where you could, really add a little bit more contrast, things like that. So I think there's potential with this image to have it elevate even further. So what are your thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, one of the problems with, sorry, one of the things I do when I'm assessing images like this is to say, what is the photographer bringing beyond the subject matter? And there's no doubt this is amazing subject matter. And, you take a photograph, it's going to look good generally. Essentially, if you get it cropped reasonably well, you're going to get something interesting out of it. But what does it say more that the photographer's brought to it? And that's where it becomes interesting. I think that's what you were trying to do with the crop there, is to say, well, what can I say about this place that hasn't been said before? And you're mentioning the rocks on the river, which are more interesting. So typically, one of the reasons we had a category this year, which for classic views or alternate take on classic views, was to try and get people to still go to these places, still have a great experience photographing them, but then try and do something bold and interesting with them compositionally, or like you say, cropping it, or with the conditions. And this is a classic case of the fact that, why would you go somewhere amazing with this geological formation and then ignore the tower in the background, which is the main feature? But that makes your photograph probably unique if you did, because nobody else would do it. So being bolder with choices is a great way of standing out. And as you say, I think we saw quite a few of this location in our entries. And one of the things we do as we're going through, if we've seen 8 or 10 images of the location beforehand and they've all been doing something interesting, then the image probably get marked down a little bit as we approach it.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it becomes hard for an image to stand out if it's of a recognizable location that 25 other people have submitted images of, right? It becomes hard. So I'm glad we did the iconic scenes category last year. I think it was an interesting experiment. This probably was entered into that particular subcategory, if I had to guess. And I think they made a bold choice with the composition here, with the clouds over here trying to counterbalance the mountain over here. However, I think it's hard because probably 24 other images just like it, and maybe this one was kind of somewhere in the middle there, right? So
I think the far left of the horizon's got a few problems as well. It doesn't have much interest in it but it's still quite dark and it pulls the eye
Right.
on
Yeah,
the actually on the horizon itself.
all
Yeah,
this stuff over here doesn't
yeah.
really add a lot of visual interest, as it were. Yep.
So all the actual interest is in the right hand side of the picture, which makes a little off
Right.
balance.
All right. Let's go to the next one from Javier here. I picked this one out because I think it has a lot of really interesting features, and out of the images that Javier submitted, it was one of my favorites. And I'm guessing that Javier put this one into our environmental wildlife category. And it took me a minute to find them, but you have these really
Yeah,
cool silhouettes of I'm
they're
guessing these are like
fabulous.
ibex perhaps down
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Really amazing, right? You've got this awesome color and you have this cloud inversion, and then you have these silhouettes of the ibex down in there. And great color. And I think the composition actually works pretty well. I think for me, the only thing that I would have liked to have seen, and I don't know if it would work or not, but you see here that there's quite a bit of the scene that's clipped out and a lot of this detail gets lost. I'd be curious if some of that detail was brought back in, not all of it, right? But just a little bit more of it. Or play harder on that silhouette feature, and maybe play with a crop where the wildlife are more emphasized, and you still can leverage some of the nice sky. Something like this maybe comes to mind for me. But
It
anyways, I'd be
pushes the
curious.
attention down to those goats. Or
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are the hero of the photograph, and
yeah,
in the original
it's still nice
composition.
to have them that small. I think it still works like that. The problem with the crop as it's seen, I think, is the brightest part of the picture is in that top left hand corner, which
Yeah,
also
yeah,
includes the very characterful little contour of the rock. So my immediate reaction, if I had this picture, would be to pull the top horizon down into that dark cloud band. So it
yeah,
provides an almost naturally vignetted top to the picture,
yeah.
and then
Some
that naturally pushes your attention down onto those goats.
right. Yeah,
And then the texture
exactly.
in the left-hand wall works. I think you haven't got the brightness to try and when you stick a bright part in the picture, it makes the darkest parts look darker. So when you take it away, you can see more detail in those parts. So no, I think it's a great picture. I love the I love that single standing boulder as well.
Yes. Yeah. Man,
Um,
it's a great photograph. And I think that again in that category, if there was a little bit more emphasis on the wildlife in the context of the entire scene by cropping in a little bit, I think it would have helped quite a bit.
I should say
Um,
that idea of cropping around darker areas in a picture as a natural vignetted edge is something I use quite often, and it works. It generally works quite well to close a picture naturally.
yeah, and I don't know about you, Tim, but when you sit down with 15,000 images in your Lightroom catalog to start judging, and you come across an image like this, and you've got that bright area in the upper left corner, and you got this nice sky inversion. Oftentimes, and I'm not saying this is good, but sometimes you're like, okay, it's a nice scene, cloud inversion, cool color, cool light. Um, but what else is there, right? And so, like, sometimes having some of those distractions pulling you away from the main subject, like the stuff down here, that can hurt you in terms of judging, because keeping, again, like our attention span is not very long when we have a job of filtering through
Yeah,
thousands and thousands of images. So like sometimes we need to be slapped across the face a little bit.
yeah.
All right. The next one from Javier, again, another image that I really, really liked. And to be quite honest with you, I would be very happy if this was one of my photographs.
Mm.
I love the polar bear on the sheet of ice, the mountain in the background, amazing. There's really not that much about this photo that isn't to like. I think the main challenge that the photographer had here, Javier, is you've got this bright area in this mountain in the upper right hand corner, and you got this bright area up in here that kind of competes for the attention of the overall photograph. Um, I think they did an okay job of handling those bright areas, but again, like that, I think, when you're looking for things that you're kind of like, what is about this image that could have been improved? Those are the things that immediately come to mind. And then again, you've got this darker area of the iceberg down here on the edge, the bottom edge. That doesn't help me very much. That's for me. So again, I'm looking at just things that kind of are distractions. But wow, great capture. Tells such an amazing story. The polar bear even almost looks like they've had a pretty rough day. So
Yeah.
yeah, curious what your
Yeah.
thoughts are though, Tim.
Yeah, I loved I mean the polar bear's fantastic, but the sense of diagonal on that ice flow, you got it's almost like stepping stones into the background towards that corner that works so well. And I like that sunlit peak in the far right hand side of the picture. But you're right, it is having a white value like that in the picture is a little distracting. It's going to be difficult to rebalance the mountain at the top there to make the white, but you could introduce the whites into the bottom part of the picture. So putting a grad over half the picture in it and just increasing the white level of the ice to make the most of it, because I think it could look a little bit dirty if you keep the white level down there. Yeah, maybe not quite that much, but yeah,
Yeah, just so people can see it.
see the difference. Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. And
And then
then and then
there's a little bit of blue over there that need to be fixed up, but yeah.
and then maybe you could paint a little bit of that onto the front of the mountain just to bring the white level up on that snowfield.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably just slap
Put
in a
one of them
nice
on it.
radial, something like this.
Yeah.
Just a
Doesn't
little
need
bit more.
much, just to bring it up slightly.
Yeah. But yeah, I felt like that mountain was competing for the attention of the main subject, which is
If you
obviously
crop
the
if you crop
polar
that
bear.
mountain out, how would it look?
I was wondering that. Um, I
It's
think it
quite off
works.
balance, isn't it? But it does work, but it's a little bit tight. It loses a bit of that diagonal.
Yeah, I agree. What if you did this? Then you lose the diagonal completely.
Yeah, yeah, no, it doesn't work.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm
I
guessing this is either a drone photo or it was taken from a boat. And, if you're moving, and so like the relationship between the polar bear and the icebergs and the mountains in the back is constantly changing. So
Yeah,
I'm sure they did the best what they could with the situation
uh,
they were given.
they did a
But
great job.
it's again, it's one of those situations like as a judge, and maybe this isn't the right approach, but again, I'm always looking for things that like, okay, what could be a better, right? And because the reason I say that is if you're looking at say 500 photographs and 10 of them are incredible, then in those 10 photographs you're whittling it down to like, okay, what could make this even better, what could make this, and then eventually you're going to get to like one or two photographs where it's like, I can't make this better, you know? So that's the challenge that you have entering
Yeah,
competitions. All right, let's move on to Kieran Carey. Let me pull these ones up, and I picked out a nice handful of images here. Start with this one. Looks like I'm guessing this is in your neck of the woods, Tim, over in
it does look like a European landscape of some sort. Yeah,
yeah.
the Scandinavian or British.
And I like this image because it does feel pretty dark. And you've got this nice tree, and then it looks like there's a little bit of light kind of coming into the scene from the top. I just felt like, how do I say this? The top part for me was a little bit distracting because of how bright it is and how much separation there is between it and the main subjects, which for me is kind of this band of trees here in the middle.
Yeah,
And so I was wondering, if perhaps a crop could improve the image a little bit. We don't need all of those foreground elements. And then I also felt like some of the image could be a bit brighter, just to pull out some of the nice color and light in those trees. But those were my initial kind of reactions to the image.
yeah. There's just a hell of a lot in the top end of the image that isn't doing a lot to contribute, I think. And if we wanted to show that off as being the top end of the image, I'd lose a lot of the bottom part with the
Yes,
sunlit field, and
something
then
like
make it just about those gradients, which works better.
yep,
Uh,
yep.
and then or otherwise tighten up. But I think that probably says more about what he was seeing without that foreground in it, because your attention's pushed up towards the top area. Are there trees in that background? A bit of compression on zoom isn't showing me much going on in the
Yeah,
top area.
yeah. I think they're just kind of hidden
Oh
in the
yeah, I can see
shadow.
them now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I quite like that, but again, sometimes subtlety doesn't work quite as well in a competition situation where things are being reviewed very quickly.
And I think
So
there's a lot of people that and I did this for a long time too, but there's a tendency for people to try to follow a rule, right? Or
mm,
like especially the rule of thirds, because you look at this photo and it's broken down pretty nicely by the rule of thirds, right? You have about a third of the image, maybe it's a fourth, but it's close, right? You got this foreground, you got these trees, you have another layer of darkness, and then you have the bright area. So I guess it's fours, but you have that nice balance. But in creating that balance, you've kind of not helped yourself. So I think being a little bit braver with the crop, and forcing the viewer to look at the parts of the image that you were most drawn to when you were capturing the photograph, I think is maybe a bolder, uh, braver approach. Trying to
yeah.
pull,
And
let me pull it up
the
here.
picture is for me about the relationship between the foreground very bright yellow tree and the ghostly tree behind it that's receding into the darkness.
Yes,
That's the core of what the picture is about.
yes,
So why not concentrate on that core? And then perhaps some of the light at the top. So
yep, I agree. All right, next one. So I picked this one out from Kieran, because I really, really liked the light, and I actually quite enjoy the composition. I think there's a lot of really good things about this photograph that are worth taking note of. Of course, I love this swath of light on the boulders. That warm light is just beautiful, and how it matches up with the shoreline in the distance.
yeah, that almost
And
gets it through to the second round on its own, doesn't it?
exactly. I really like these foreground rocks, but I felt like this one in the bottom right corner is not doing you any favors. I think it's because of how bright it is in relation to these nice rocks in the middle. It's not helping you much. I like the diagonality of this particular rock in the bottom left, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how those particular parts of the photograph help or hurt the composition, Tim.
Yeah, the picture is about those pinpoints of light on the curve of rocks and its relationship with the trees in the background. Given that, there's a lot of space taken up by stuff that isn't that. Um, and I'd say you're hardly ever wrong to try and crop tightly on what the picture's about. Um, if some of these rocks would have connected the composition together better, it may work, but I don't think they are working well to enhance the composition. And I would have done exactly what you've just done, which I think turns into a picture of layers with the rocks forming more cohesive whole rather than having some of the dark areas. And that ties nicely with the layering of the sky bands and the forest in the background.
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember whose quote this is, but I think it goes something like, I've never seen a photograph that couldn't be cropped.
Very rarely, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think just a simple crop would have improved this image quite a bit. And again, I think the photographer perhaps was trying to kind of maybe follow a little bit of a formula in terms of like, well, I need a foreground, right? And well,
Mm.
sometimes by including the foreground, you're actually hurting the composition. So I think a little bit of a crop would have made a huge difference here.
I suspect the picture would have worked before that sunlight hit those rocks. If you look
Hmm.
at it the way you've got it there, without the light on the rocks, it sort of forms a jumble of rocks, but a little bit more cohesive. But as
Hmm.
soon as those highlights popped up, they became the attention, and everything else was extraneous.
Right. And I wonder too, because like I said before, some of those rocks are pretty bright in the bottom. So I'm wondering like if we just
Just dark. Yeah,
darkened them down some. I mean, this is super brute force just to give you yeah, I mean, look how you
add a
can see
vignette on it as well.
the tonal values of these bright rocks in the corners are really bright. So yeah, we'd have to do there we
Right at the
go.
bottom.
Wrong direction. There we go. But yeah, that gives you an idea of maybe that would help a little bit, but I think a
That's
crop
all.
is still the better
That's more
solution.
balanced like that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to the next one from Kieran. So I picked this one out because I really liked the scene. I like the the mood of the photograph. I love the light. I love the clouds. I love the reflection of the light in the water. Uh, and I think it's a situation. Are you still there, Tim?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. For some reason, like, okay, cool. I'll cut that out. Um, I think there's a lot of things that could have been done here to improve the photograph compositionally. Um, for starters, I think this rock on the bottom left is super heavy and dominant. It occupies a huge amount of space. And I'm not sure that you need all of that. I think the
The
reason it was included is because you wanted to keep in some of this water that was washing back down into
yeah,
the ocean. And I would have liked to have seen a lot more of that.
the
And
texture of that rock, the yellow, the sort of like whites and yellow lichens make it look quite distracting and hide any sense of three dimensionality with it as well.
yeah, and then in the bottom right hand corner, I think if you excluded some of this stuff here that's on the edge, that would have helped quite a bit as well, pulling it into something like that. And then again, I wish there was a little bit more of this flowing water to kind of pull the viewer down into the ocean where the nice light is. I mean, this is the subject, right? All of this great light
Yeah.
and all of that. So if there was flowing water that kind of pulled you in from all directions, it would have made for a much more compelling composition to improve what I think is a pretty nice scene.
Alternative, crop right into that sunset and texture in the water. So it's just about that. Because at the top right hand corner where it's very bright in the sky is also a distraction for me.
Yeah, how far do you want me to go?
Get rid of that white sky in the top. So a bit further down. That's all right for the right. A bit further from the top, about there. Yeah.
What are you thinking, like this?
Yeah, something like that.
Hmm,
It may
yeah,
not work as a picture, but it's the interesting stuff in it that had
right.
me.
Yeah, and I think even if you pulled in a little bit more from the left. But yeah, to me, it's like this is the visual interest. And so how can you
Yeah.
use those rocks to pull the viewer into that and hold their attention in there? Because before, I feel like the the viewers, this is competing as the main subject, this big rock in the corner. So
Yeah.
I'm one
Yeah.
of the things I'm always teaching on my workshops is when you're at a location and you're drawn to a subject, think about how including or excluding various parts of what's there will either direct the attention of the viewer to the thing that you're most drawn to or will distract them away from it. And of course, we want to do the former versus the latter as much as we can.
I should say also tonally, a lot of that foreground, everything in the bottom half of the picture is a very similar tone. It's very flat.
Hmm.
There isn't much sense of shape and structure in terms of contrast. So I'm not sure that's because of it's had a lot of shadow recovery.
Yeah, and this is one of those scenes too where like if the photographer maybe scooted up a little bit, and I don't know what's down in here, but maybe the composition then leverages all of this misty water and these
Mm.
foreground rocks, and it's a little bit more simplistic, right? I mean, imagine if you're down in there like this.
Yeah, you're getting those highlights off the sunset on the wet rock.
Yeah, exactly. And then you actually don't even need that much of the sunset. And then it becomes more about the flow of the water and how it pulls you into the light. So
Yeah,
things to think about. All right. Let's move on to Mathias Libor.
yeah.
I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Matthias. Or it's probably Matthias. Anyway, so this is the first one I pulled out. I picked this one because I think it's a pretty interesting photograph. Um, I like that you have this single kind of branch of this tree resting on this side of the hillside full of snow, and then you have this other tree that's up above it. It's a very simple photograph. I think to your earlier point, Tim, we get a lot of photographs that are very similar to this in nature. And
Mm.
so then it becomes what makes this one stand out, right? Like if there were some other things in the foreground that would be visually interesting, or if some of the texture of the snow was brought out a little bit more, thinking about what are some other ways to make this photograph stand out. But overall, I think it's a pretty successful photograph, and it did quite well. It got 4 stars. So obviously, it had a lot going for it in the competition. But those were my initial reactions.
I think some of what comes out here for me was a sort of narrative feel to it. It's almost like the father saying to the son, "Not far to the top now, son. We're nearly there." And it's only sort of little silly things, but they give you a sense of story, something more than just in the picture itself. But what I think I liked about this was the sense of flat light. It's often we're looking for really bold contrasts, but in this it's all about subtle shadows. You know, the way the left-hand tree leans against the snow and the soft shadows around it, I quite like.
Yes.
And the pale eggshell blue of the sky. There's a lot just subtle shapes to it, and obviously the form is very obvious, strong form.
What in your mind would elevate this to from 4-star to 5-star?
Something more depth-wise in terms of texture, or because it's once you've got past that, the two trees reacting against the slope, there isn't anything beyond that to keep your interest. So, as an example, the picture that won this year just gone, the picture of the pool in the forest with the deep blues everywhere, that didn't do particularly well straight away with judges, but that grew on people as we saw more and more details, like the drops of water and the splashes going on. And then you look in the background, you can see some fallen trees. Whereas this picture doesn't reward continuous looking. So you might like it to begin with, but when you go back to it, it's like, yeah, I've seen it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because I've gotten into debates about this with other people, but whenever I'm looking at images like this, I'm always looking for ways to encourage the viewer's eyes to bounce back and forth to different subjects. And with this scene, there's really kind of like only two things that hold you in, right? Like it's like you just
Yeah.
kind of bounce back and forth between these two things. Whereas I feel like if perhaps there was something in the sky or down here in the middle or down here in the corner, if there was something else to kind of tie everything together to give me more to look at, it might hold my attention for longer.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously it did very well. Let's go to the next one from Mathias. So this is like perhaps a good example of something that did very well with a very similar subject matter, and it did get 5 stars. And let's talk a little bit about why. So kind of contrasting with the previous image, I think this has some of those formulaic things that we're looking for with a more minimalistic scene. You've got the main subjects are these two trees, but then you have the big mountain in the background. So it gives the viewer the opportunity to kind of look, to have their eyes bouncing between things. So,
Yeah.
for example, just real quick, if I do this and I do like this, you've got kind of your eye can go like that, and then it bounces over here, and then it bounces over here. So you have this nice 3 dimensions that you're kind of bouncing back and forth, looking at the photo over and over and over again. So I think from a compositional perspective, it just works really well in that regard. So nice job.
Yeah. It's got classic with this is the sort of I mean, they talk about a Claudian bracketing of trees. It's Claude used to do this idea of just having one tree and let one side, one on tree, the framing a view in between. And it's wonderfully done here with the closest tree on the right in that little pocket of snow. And then the next furthest tree is the left-hand one, and then there's another further one on the right-hand side. And it's like a progression leading you into the picture, leading you into that main view. And then the mountains are just perfectly bracketed. He's spent a little bit of a time finding the right position to provide the perfect spacing between the branches and the outline of the mountain. And then there's just lots and lots of little things to pick up on, like in the right-hand side, just in that little hollow of the tree next to the snow on the mountain on the right. Keep going right, down the middle. So if you go up a bit, right a bit, right a bit, up, that bit, no, I can't see it. To the right-hand side of the right-hand tree
Yeah.
on the horizon.
Oh, on the horizon.
You go, there. You can see there's just one branch sitting on its own in that little hole.
Ah, yes, right there.
Yeah, and that's just a little. It's only a little thing, but it fits nicely. It's satisfying that it exists in that little space without clashing.
Yeah, I was thinking the
Um,
same thing about this little kind of series of branches that are
Yes.
sticking up through the snow here
Yeah.
in this area too.
And then the branch on the middle tree that just stands against the snow in the foreground to emphasize that sort of like spotty nature of the greens that recedes into the background. And that's echoed with the greens of the trees on the banks of the mountain in the background.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that it's very challenging with photographs like this is to have subject separation. And I love that they gave enough room for these branches in the mountain. Like there's just enough breathing room around the mountain to where the mountain has its own space to occupy within the frame. And it's not distracting with overlapping tangents. So I think they did a great job with that as well.
A great picture.
Yeah. All right. The third one from Matthias. We've got this image, which is very similar to the year. I think that was year 3 photo of the year. With I think that was from Gabriel Stankiewicz. Very similar subject matter with a couple of single trees, trunks, and a black river and white snow. This image did fairly well in the competition. It's 3 stars. I think it works pretty well in terms of the subject. You've got these nice, strong diagonal lines that pull you down in from the top into here, and then these smaller things pull you back up into this splash of white snow in the middle. But there's a couple of things for me that are a little bit distracting. You've got this stuff up here on the edge of the corner of that tree that are a little bit of a distraction, and then this tangent with this twig that goes through and over the other side of the white snow in the middle of the water. If this was cut off like right in here, it would be more, I'm not trying to say perfect, but I think, I'm looking for things that where it could be improved. And those are the things that
Yeah.
caught my attention.
Yeah, for me, I was quite pleased with how bold this was. The slashes of the diagonal trunks of the trees are great. But like you say, the 2 twigs in the middle, it would be better if that left hand of the 2 little twigs didn't exist. Because it's a bit scrappy. It overlaps, like you said. It's got the worn away bark at the bottom of it. But even then, the Y-shaped little trunk in the foreground, it's just a little bit tight on that left-hand slash of trunk.
Yeah.
So it's got a few things that are just slightly off, jarring about it. And then the top left-hand corner is just a little bit tight where the black water meets the snow and the trunk. So it's a great concept, and I think the reason it probably got through to the second round is because it's quite a nice bold idea, but it
Yep.
just didn't cohere particularly well.
All right. Nice. Let's go to Patrick Krohn.
Yeah, thanks, Mathias.
So Patrick submitted a lot of really amazing images. Big fan of his photography. And I've kind of picked out 3 very different images from the ones that he submitted. And we'll start with this one. Looks like a very intimate view of a crashing wave. What immediately drew me to this photograph is it has a lot of energy to it. You've got the white stuff in the foreground that's kind of spilling up with these nice, almost like claw marks. It's almost like a claw of an animal that's clawing into the wave there. And then you have this nice formation of energy here, and then this nice line across the middle of the scene. I think for me, a few things that I would have liked to have seen is a little bit more exposure of the dark wave part, maybe just ever so slightly more exposure there, because I feel like it almost feels a little bit forced with the maybe the brushwork in terms of like the bright parts of this water against the dark parts of the wave behind it. It just feels a little bit too
Yeah,
intentional is maybe the word I'm looking for. I'm not sure,
it's
but
it's a bit heavy-handed, something that may work in black and white, but I think it doesn't work particularly well in color. And as you say, you can just about make out the texture of the water in the background, but it's not enough to be of interest. So it fits in the mid-ground between just being a nice contrasty black background and actually having some playing a part. Whereas below the wave, it's completely black, and you can't see any structure at all, really.
yeah, I just did a conversion to black and white real quick, and I think kind
So
of
you can see
shows.
structurally, it simplifies things quite nicely.
Hmm.
I do love
Although I,
that.
I do love
flow
the
into the picture.
I like the midnight blue back in here though. I think that's a nice touch, but I think some of the darker areas just feel a little too dark for me.
Can you
But
bring the shadows up just to see if there is anything in there?
yeah, there's definitely some light in
Yeah, if you
there.
turn the saturation down on that a little bit, and I think it might be, I might prefer that.
There you go.
I think I prefer that because it's gone from being a little bit over manipulated to something that sits in the real, as it were.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not that sort of path, like the yellow brick road path that's going into the wave is fantastic. I really like that idea.
Yeah, it's an awesome composition the way that it's structured. So, um, it's nice job. Okay, let's go check out his other ones. Here's the next one. This one I picked out because first of all, I think it's very different than a lot of the images that Patrick typically submits to our competition. He usually submits a lot of abstract and intimate stuff, and this feels like a very wide angle scene that is a little bit unusual for his work. I really like the composition and how it just pulls you in. It's almost like a tunnel that pulling you into that kind of stuff in here. Um, Obviously, with the rules of our competition, you can't get rid of the street signs that are in here, and I don't necessarily think they're all that distracting anyway, but those would be
No,
things that people might look out for. And then I think maybe there's like a little bit of a border that was left in to the photograph here
yeah,
at the top.
it's either a film scanner or it's just been cropped and lost a
Yeah.
little bit.
So those are just a couple of minor things, but otherwise I really enjoyed this image. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Tim, on what you felt like what could be improved upon.
Yeah, I love that mirror effect and the tunnel effect definitely. And the contrast between the trees on either side of the road is great. The one thing that really breaks it for me is how bright the road is. The tan color there.
Yes.
If that could be turned down to the same tonality as the trunks of the trees, I think that would work a lot better. So might be a selective mask you could do just to reduce that slightly.
Yeah. See if I can do this real quick. So if we do that
To
and
intersect it with a brightness thing or a
intersect
color
it
thing.
maybe with a color
Color
range
might be.
and then just this is where
Yeah, it gives you the
luminosity mask's
idea.
better.
Yeah,
But yeah, just to give you an idea of how that would potentially slightly improve it. So
that
let's
that doesn't stand out now. It doesn't break the reflection. Before it was a real distraction right in the middle, and that works better.
yeah, and I
The
was
other
thinking
the
the
other
same with this stuff here.
yeah, yeah. So just try and make that darker so it blends a little with the trees.
Yeah.
And the only other one was possibly the light edge of the greenery on the left-hand edge. There's a patch of sunlight there that's a little
Right
tiny
here.
bit distracting. Oh, on the break between the two.
Ah,
So
yes.
there, that's it. Yeah.
Right.
Those are sort of things I'd want to reduce slightly. The final one is in the reflection. There's obviously a warm. It's a muddy pool, I think, and it's cast some browns into the reflection that could probably be neutralized a little bit by cooling off the bottom part of the picture. The opposite of brown is probably a cyany color. So if you the color temperature probably does the job a little bit,
There you
maybe.
go. Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't look quite as brown.
Right.
So something like that maybe in between, but you get the idea that you've got a less obvious color cast in there now.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I didn't even see that. So that's a good observation. Nice. But it's a really cool photograph. I think it's really neat.
Hmm.
And what's cool about it too is I think it's one of those images where there's lots of photos within the photo. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like you could crop this lots of different ways and it would still be a super interesting image. You know what I mean? Like,
It is interesting that the street signs are there, but they're not actually objectionable because
right.
the scale of the picture is enough that they're not a distraction, and
Right.
it's what the place is. It still looks cool.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the third one here. So super simple, minimalistic photograph. And I really love this image. I love the high key nature of it. I think the main challenge with a photograph like this is that this particular style of imagery is very popular right now. And so to have it compete against lots of other images that are very similar to it is hard. Um, and man, there's not a lot really that he could have done here, in my opinion, to improve it. I think it's a very strong image, and it did very well. It's 4 stars, so I mean, that's an image that could potentially be within our book, even potentially could win a category. So I mean, I'm just trying to point out like some of the obvious things. Like it's a great image, not a lot you could do to improve it, and lots of other images that are very similar to it that it competes against.
I think my initial instinct on this one that it would probably be that it might not end up being allowed because the background looks like it's painted in or oversimplified. And I can go back to the raw file and notice that it has had a bunch of extraneous parts cloned out.
Ah,
So it wouldn't have been allowed in the final rounds of the competition anyway. But
gotcha.
the
Okay.
but the way the background is actually correct, it hasn't been painted in the background. It's actually just a perfectly clean background. So without if they'd have tried to find a way of excluding the branches that were in the picture that were sticking in the sides without cloning, I think it would have done better in the competition.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's good to know because I think it's hard to find these minimalistic scenes in nature without the use of the clone stamp tool or the remove tool to simplify it. So I applaud anyone who's able to find scenes like this without using those tools heavily. Okay. Next, we'll go to Patrick Lantz. And I've got a small selection of images here that I pulled forward for Patrick. This one I really enjoyed because it almost looks like green butterflies floating
Yeah, yeah.
through the air. I mean, it's got like that nice equivalence factor going on for it. Some metaphors happening here with the low-key nature of the scene and the use of light to really pull forward the interesting bits. I think for me, a couple of things that would an improvement is I feel like some of the cropping was a little too tight. Like on this left edge, it's awfully close to the edge, and then on the bottom, it's awfully close to that edge. And then of course some of them are a little bit more out of focus than I would prefer to see. So just minor things like that that I think would have been some improvements on that particular image. What about for you, Tim?
I like the fact that they're not trying to paint out the black in the background, so it's still got some, it's making that sort of like high key parts against a blank background, but still leaving some of the background in to show that it's part of the scene. But I think you're right. I think the biggest problem of it is um, the structure. So they're very close to the edge, quite a few are, and there isn't much right in the middle of the scene where you want to within that central section, you want to see the main compositional features, and there isn't really much there for it. So instinctively, the idea is great, but I'd like to see a little bit more structure in the greenery.
Yeah, or just more of them too, like some more
Yeah,
patterning.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's these images play on their relationships between each
Mhm.
butterfly, let's call it. And so trying to find a pattern how they all fit together is the key to making them work.
All right. Let's go to this one. So I picked this one out because of I noticed that it only had 2 stars. And on first glance, I think it's a very interesting photograph. I actually really like it. I love I'm guessing this is like a vine maple. And I love this moss covered tree over here. And I love the contrast between the big chunky tree without leaves and then the smaller tree that has leaves. Um, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, I have my own, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what is it about this photo that made it not get a higher score?
Yeah, I'm just actually looking for the picture in my library here so I can remind myself about it. There we go. Um, Tree pictures such as this are another one of these where you there's a lot entered, a hell of a lot. So you've automatically put yourself in a category that's very competitive by using the subject or taking photographs of a subject matter like this. Um, the the structure of it, I mean, there's some things that I really like about it. The individual items like the maple leaves on the right-hand side that are following this branch up are great. The background, which looks, is it against rock? Is it against the rock background or is it against trunks in the background?
I think those are tree trunks. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the top right, is it the same as well? More tree trunks it is, yeah. But I
Mhm.
like those that sort of grayish tonality in the gaps. What perhaps doesn't work quite as well is there's a trunk on the left-hand side, and there's these features on the right-hand side, and you're looking for a good connection between the two. And because it takes up so much of the picture, that branch across the middle, or the way of connecting these two left and right disparate items, has to be strong. And I
Mm.
just don't think it works strong enough as a core part of the composition to go a step further in the competition here. So if that central branch had have had more going on with it, it could have been just getting through. But it's
Yeah,
just
that
this
makes
central.
that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking a couple other things too. You've got these distractions in the upper right-hand corner that aren't helping you out, doing you any favors. And then you've got this brighter area on the very far left edge that's not doing you any favors. Those two things alone are like kind of pulling you away from the main part of the photo that's interesting, which is the leaves on the right, the tree on the left, and then the connection between the two. And I'm just curious if a very simple crop from too much, but if we were to go, I don't know, like
To try and
something like,
enhance that single branch. Yeah.
yeah, like make that more of the connect, like it's this reaching out, it's trying to grab the stuff on the right hand side. I don't
It's
know.
working better like that. There is still that blob on the right hand side is bright and it does pull really off to one side. And I think
Right.
that's probably the part of the problem. But can you darken off that right hand edge? Let's put a grad over it or something. See if they can see if it is the brightness that's bothering me.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
I think that helps.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Because now it just
So
feels like the main subject, which is that tree on the left, reaching out and grabbing the tree on the right. I think it works a lot better that way. So
yeah.
if
It would have
it's
been great if that single S-shaped branch had been more featured and waved a bit more. It would have been great. A really nice idea.
yeah, yeah. But to your point, we get probably hundreds and hundreds of images similar to this one. So then it
Mm.
just becomes about like, okay, what is it about this one that could be better? And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot in our competition is like there's some really great photographs that there's just other ones that are slightly even better. All
It's definitely on the
right.
borderline of going through that one. Yeah.
Yes. And then okay, so the last one, I picked this one out because this one actually did go through pretty far from Patrick, and I got 4 stars. And it has a lot of similar features as the last image in terms of the composition, with a big subject on the left, smaller subjects on the right. But I think for this one, the reason why it did better is because you have a little bit more connection between the subjects. You've got a lot more visual interest. You have this nice trunk on the right, and then you've got this beautiful little tree sapling guy in between the two of
Mm.
them. And it almost feels like a family portrait of some kind. It tells an interesting story beyond just here's some trees.
Yeah.
And then I love this light kind of creeping
It's a,
in.
it's a sense of light. That's what it's about. This one. It's a three-dimensionality and sense of light. It's
Yeah,
just
that
really soft and shaped.
yes, yes, exactly. Um, and then in terms of like how it could be improved, I would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more of this fern in the bottom left corner not be cut off, or just include a tiny little bit more of it if possible. Um, And then other than that, like there's a couple of like these stray leaves that are maybe reflecting light. So if like if you use a polarizer to maybe eliminate some of those the reflectivity of some of those leaves, that could have helped, or just to darken them down in post could have been helpful. But overall, I really enjoyed this particular image a lot.
It's a great photograph. The sense of depth to it is fantastic. The
Yes.
only thing I might have done myself, if it was me, is to brighten up the sweep of branches and the greenery in the foreground. Just brighten up some of that to bring the
Ah, This
Do you know
stuff,
what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, basically that there. Yeah. That's it.
something like that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
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 Just
Okay.
to just to bring the attention forward a little bit in that space.
Hmm. I think that works nicely. Yeah.
Wonderful
Yeah.
picture.
It's great. It's a great photograph. So nice job, Patrick. Okay. Let's go to Pete Edwards. So pulled up three of Pete's photos here. Three very, very different photos I picked here. So this will be very interesting. This first one, I think this is one of those images that it's like, I bet that was probably a spectacular scene to witness. An
Oh yeah.
amazing sunrise or sunset. I'm sure that was just killer. You've got this perfectly exposed bird in the middle, cruising through the scene. You've got these nice little elements here in the scene to kind of tie things together. But I think it's trying to do a little bit too much. And I'm wondering if a little bit of a simplification could have helped. Um, First of all, nice job including the dark bits at the very top
Yeah.
to kind of help anchor you from leaving the top of the frame. But I wonder if maybe we included a little bit too much on the bottom. And I'm wondering if something like this could be a little bit more effective.
You're trying to find subjects, aren't you?
That was it too, is what is the subject, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've got the bird kind of competing against some of these, I guess these are icebergs perhaps, or
I think
floating
so. Yeah.
ice.
Yeah. Possibly.
And to your point, I just felt like there wasn't like a main subject. There's not like a hero of the image. Like I'm
Mm.
not quite sure what I'm supposed to be looking at. And then of course, some small things like there's a couple dust spots here in the image that needed to be cleaned up. There's a couple in this top section as well. So just paying attention to some of those smaller details as well would be helpful. But
I'll say
overall composition, I
tonality
was
wise, it's
puzzled.
brilliant, isn't it? It's the capture of the color and the sense of light in it is really nicely handled,
Yes,
and contrast. It's just it it doesn't know what it is. It's not a picture of the bird. There isn't enough icebergs to give a compositional structure to it. You end up with something that's very pretty, layered sense of color and contrast, but not
yes,
much more than that.
yep, yep. And I find those types of photographs, critiquing them is very difficult to do because um, I would wager that putting a photograph like this in one of those like really big like photography Facebook groups, people would be like, ooh and ah, and like it's beautiful sunset. But from a landscape photography perspective, like I feel like there needs to be more structure to it. There needs to be more of a subject, something that is telling the viewer like this is what the photograph is about, and here's how I'm accentuating it.
And
And
it's that putting yourself into a category. If you're going to say this is a picture of the sunset, you're in a category that's really competitive. And it's a beautiful sense a picture of a sunset in terms of tonality. But there are so many pictures of sunsets and on water that we have submitted. So
yes.
it's got to be really, really good to get past that.
Yeah, and the other thing is highlights are a little clipped up here in the sky. So those are other things to just look out for. All right, moving on to the next one here. I really like this one a lot.
Yeah, it looks like it shouldn't like it because compositionally it's a bit messy, but it's quite satisfying, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and this is one of those images where I would first congratulate the photographer for being drawn to such a very interesting subject with the light passing through that chunk of ice and then showing the inner core of it in the translucent kind of aqua color coming through the ice there. I think that's really fantastic. Um, to your point, and I don't know what else lives on the outskirts because this has obviously been cropped, but I feel like the placement of that object is what left me kind of feeling a little, I don't know if the word is unbalanced or it's uneasy. Like if it just feels like this iceberg was just kind of like dropped into the middle of this scene. And so there's not much for me to like tie it all together. You've got these nice clouds and these nice lenticulars and this bright light, but if this is to be the main subject, which I think it is because it's very awesome, I feel
Yeah.
like there needed to be a little bit more emphasis on that subject in terms of making it stand out more. So perhaps a crop from the top or the bottom. I don't know, something like this. I'm trying to find ways to like put more emphasis on that as the subject.
It's the almost central position that doesn't quite work as well. It doesn't know whether it's in the middle or it's not in the middle. So I think if you take a crop from the right hand side a little bit as well, so you're placing it off to one side, and so it can act as a contrast to the mountain on the left hand side. Then you've got a diagonal
Yes.
forming slightly.
Yes.
And you've got the diagonal of the snow and ice in the bottom right hand corner, the light area. So it's got a little bit more structure like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's one of those situations like a really good photograph that just there's something quiet about it that didn't work for me, and I think you just nailed it.
But
And I love center weighted subjects.
Yeah.
But in this particular scene, like there wasn't enough balance to make it work.
Can you try and put it right in the middle of the picture? So
Yeah.
you'd have to come on from that side.
We have to
Then
lose
down a
that
bit.
big awesome mountain though. But
Leave a
yes.
bit of it in there. Right in the
Look at
middle.
Oh, there you go.
It's a bit bolder, but as you say, you've lost a bit of the mountain interest there, haven't you? So
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to sacrifice that mountain. It's too
but the
good.
quality, what it is, I think about this one is it's the quality of light that's just really
Oh,
nice and
it
satisfying.
is.
And then on top of that, that diagonal of ice in the bottom right hand corner does act as a nice compositional element, and it parallels the shadow of the green iceberg as well. And
Yeah, I
there's
feel
green
like
icebergs in the background as well that play to
I feel like if you
counterfoil it.
just
So
chopped off some of that sky, it would help a lot. Yeah.
yeah, or step to the left slightly.
Yeah, right, right.
But
Yeah,
you can't
exactly.
say that because it's you don't know what's to the left.
Right.
Probably end up in
Could
the
have
water.
exactly.
Or they might be in a zodiac. Quite
Yes.
possible.
Okay. Nice one, Pete. And then the last one I wanted to pull forward was this one. And for me, like this is so unusual because it's almost like they took that lenticular cloud and they turned it on its side,
Yeah,
which that made me scratch my head like how did that cloud even come to be in
it's
existence?
absolutely insane, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's to me, it's one of those images like it immediately has like impact because of the subject. And I think in terms of composition, it's pretty well balanced. You've got this nice line that pulls you in from there. So I think like there's a lot going on for this image that makes it work very well. What are your thoughts on how to improve it?
I'm trying to work out what it actually is because it's. I mean, I think probably it didn't go through because it's just so jarring. Um, 'Cause if we say it is real, um, we can say that we know what the subject matter is. The subject matter is that lenticular, very odd structure of it. If we're saying that's the subject, then the diagonal of the lenticular on the right that's sitting 90 degrees to it is a distraction. The sky is just blown out slightly. You're starting to see some color distortion in the
Yeah,
area
right in
above the
the
mountain range. Yeah, it's just
yes.
starting to go that yellowy, greeny yellow that it does if it's clipped. Um, so what do you say? The problem with this is it doesn't quite work as a landscape photograph because it is just an atmospheric effect. So what makes it interesting is what it is, not what the photographer's done with it.
Hmm.
That makes sense. If I wanted to turn it into a picture, I would probably just crop the left-hand side of the picture so it's just the edge of the mountain range and the lenticular on its own.
Hmm. So something more like this.
Yeah, something. So it really does emphasize it. And then if you could take the highlights down somehow, I don't know.
And I feel like there's, I think it's kind of magenta-y as well.
I think yeah, that in that sky
And
conditions,
almost
you can see
like
the green on the horizon there, can't you? Almost know it when you
I feel
looked at
like
it
if it
like
was a
that.
little cooler and a little bit greener, it would feel more natural, to me.
But an amazing scene if that is true. Yeah,
It's pretty wild.
yeah, absolutely.
Even if you pulled the shadows up a bit, that helps give a little bit more context in the mountains as well. But yeah, it's a cool scene. But I struggled with this one because it had like that immediate impact, but then there wasn't anything more to like keep me hooked.
Yeah, yeah. It is a photograph of an atmospheric effect rather than an artistic landscape photograph.
Oh, it has artistic qualities, but
It,
they could be
not
improved upon.
yeah, not strong enough to go to the next round, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, good job, Pete. Really cool stuff. Now let's move on to Stefano. Stefano Balma. And picked out three very different images from Stefano. And interestingly, I really, really, really liked this particular image. Um, I again, I think this is one of those cases of we have a lot of people submitting very similar type images like this of abstracty kind of seafoam texture type stuff with interesting reflected light. Um, and so then it just becomes about like, how does this one stand out above 20 or 30 other images that are very similar to it?
Yeah.
Um, I think it has great flow. For me, I really like these little color splashes, this kind of
The
orangey color.
variations in yellows and things, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that stuff. And I like this set of bubbles here. Like it almost looks like a
Spider eye.
spider's eye. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so like there's a lot to like in this particular photograph. And I don't think there's like a ton of ways to make it a lot better. It just happens to be within a subcategory that we get a lot of images in.
I think the top right hand side of the picture where there isn't much of the bubbles and streams is probably not adding a lot to the picture, whereas the main subject is that like Milky Way-esque strand of spider's eyes in the left-hand half of the picture. So you could probably make it a square out of the left two-thirds of the picture, and it would be a lot stronger.
I also wonder if we just rotated it. Like,
Yeah, that
I
actually
think
works stronger. Yeah.
I think having that now I feel like it has more of a flow to it. Um,
But it is very competitive. You'd be amazed at how many people submit pictures of this plant proteins.
yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic image. Not a lot of ways to make it better. Um,
Can you put that square crop in at the bottom half of it? Well, the left hand two-thirds as it was before it's rotated.
oh, before rotating it. Oh yeah, hold on. So pull it in from this way.
Yeah, just go two-thirds across.
Gonna lose that spider eye?
Yeah, lose that one. There's more in there. It
Yeah,
feels more balanced there that it is the two big strands
right. And I almost feel
of
like there could be, if there's a little bit more room on the bottom for these colors, that would have been
yeah,
nice to see as well. Yeah.
really nicely done there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image. All right, next one, very different, is we have this kind of atmospheric rising
Mm.
fog and steam in this mountainous landscape with clouds and layers. And for me, like this is a very beautiful photograph. If this was in my portfolio, I'd be very happy to have this because of the conditions and the layers of light and all of that. And I think that's what the strength of this image is, and the receding layers of kind of the orange clouds with the mountains with more orange clouds and then blue and then orange. So you have this nice receding pattern. I just feel like we could have used a little bit more separation between some of the elements. Like up here, I'm not sure this little area in the right hand side helps you that much. If we pulled in some of that stuff, that to me helps it become less distracting a little bit. Because for me, like the main hero of the subject is all this orange and blue interaction here.
Mm.
But what are your thoughts,
The,
Tim?
two things stood out to me. One is it looks like the shadows have been lifted massively in that central area of the picture, which
Ah,
has
yes.
created a lack of contrast across the scene. Um, and it's also lost some because that's been lifted like that. It's lost some of the boldness and brightness of the sunlit clouds. And I think you'd have to do a selective one on that, just that foreground. But you can also see, the edge where it's been lifted. There's a halo, not a thin halo, quite a large halo that's brightened the clouds around it.
Up there.
Yeah, and on the front and on the foreground bit as well. So on the left-hand side of that foreground lump, you got very bright clouds.
Uh-huh.
And that looks like the area where it's been lifted. Plus, it's not a sharpening, it looks like a clarity that's been added to the picture that's made the edges just a little bit crunchy.
Yes. I see what you mean.
Especially the foreground and the
Especially on
yeah,
this
yeah.
layer here, yeah. Uh-huh.
And that might be something to do with it. It looks like there's been a mask for that foreground and the shadows have been pulled up and it's added a bit of clarity to try and get some detail out of it. But in the process, it's created something a bit crunchy and made the tonal relationships go off. Because if you look into the right-hand side corner, right bottom corner, that's probably the shade that hillside was. It was quite dark.
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting point about how this part of the foreground is in light and this one is in darkness. So to me, that feels like an editing issue for sure.
Yeah.
Because in nature, you would expect, I mean, I'm just trying to think if the sun was, I'm guessing the sun was off to the left or slightly
Backlit to the
backlit.
left. Yeah.
Yeah, backlit to the left. And so you would expect pretty much this entire face to be the same tonal range, right? And the fact that you have it goes from bright to dark, it just kind of doesn't make sense, right? And I think to
Yeah.
your point, I think it's just the edit that was applied. Yeah. But man, what an awesome scene, huh?
Great structure and beautiful light. Absolutely.
Yep, yep. Okay. And then the last one got this really awesome waterfall. I'm guessing probably from Iceland or Norway, something like that. Really cool structure in that water. I think they chose like the perfect shutter speed for this image.
Yeah.
I love the moodiness of this photograph. Couple minor things for me, like the brightness of the reflected light on this rock is a bit of a distraction. Maybe use of a polarizer could have helped, or maybe just toning down some of that part of that rock could help. And then you've got this line of kind of bright area here that comes in that's super
Yeah.
bright and a little bit distracting for me. But overall, I think it's a really powerful image.
I'm just going to bring that one up. What number have we got on that one? On the last number, is it 51119?
Yes.
Just going to find it on mine. Hang on a second. Yeah, got it. I was just checking that it looks like there's been a lot of noise reduction on the Zoom session. But it does look like it's been smoothed a little bit too much in places, maybe in the water. It's not as bad as it looks on Zoom though here.
Okay.
But yeah, the main thing is the distractions. I think these especially that bottom left hand line,
Yeah, that's
which is
for me, that's a huge problem.
yeah. The main structure of the image, I really like you say, the shutter speed is perfect.
So
And
in
there's just
our
enough detail in those backgrounds, isn't there? There's just enough detail in the cave behind it. But
so,
again,
so
there's a lot of pictures submitted of these sorts of waterfalls. In fact, probably this
sure.
waterfall.
So for our competition rules, Tim, what are your thoughts on the best way to manage distractions like this one?
Yeah, the key to that is really about dropping the white, selectively masking it, and just taking the white level of that line down.
Mm-hmm.
You could use negative clarity to try and reduce the contrast of the edge a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
blur it slightly. But I think mostly I'd try and do it with taking the whites down. So
Yeah.
if masking it carefully, knocking the whites down from a real white down to like a 3/4 gray,
I
and then
feel
it just wouldn't
like,
stand out. It can still be there. It doesn't need to be kicked out completely.
yeah, and I think if there was balance to it, like if there was something similar to that on the right-hand side, it wouldn't be as jarring because you would have more symmetry and uniformity, and
Mm.
it would not pull you necessarily to one side or the other. It would feel more like a uniform way of pulling you up into the main part of the composition. Whereas like just having that bright line on one side, it just becomes a distraction at that point.
Yeah. And one of the things we like doing in pictures is trying to work out what things are. And I automatically look at that and I can't dismiss it because I'm going, what is it? What's that line doing there?
Yeah,
Why is it appearing? And it
right.
just that just takes your attention straight to it and away from the subject.
Yeah, yeah. But fantastic photograph either way.
Strong picture. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, moving on to Tom Polachek. So we got some very interesting images from Tom. This
Yeah, Tom's got
first
some
one,
really graphic images, hasn't he?
yeah. So this first one is a black and white photograph of, I'm guessing, ice. I don't totally know. Or it's like,
I think it's River Delta where all the steps are animal steps.
oh wow, okay, that makes sense. Oh yeah, down there, I see it now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting image. Like they've obviously pushed it really far in post in terms of black and white and contrast and making this image more about the shapes and the textures of whatever that scene is. I think you're right. It's like an aerial photo of a river delta. That makes way more sense now, but very unusual presentation of that subject.
Yeah. It's I think this is one of those cases where I ask myself, has it gone a little bit too far in taking a subject that's sitting in the real and making it and over processing it a
Mm,
little bit? And mostly that's about the blacks
yes,
because
right.
it looks like it could be a structure of ice against a black beach background or something, but it does look like those blacks have been selectively masked and painted out nearly.
I mean, there's stuff in
Um,
there for sure.
there's something in the background, but it's very close to black.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
I
I'd
would
have liked
like
to
to,
seen a little bit of that come through.
yeah, exactly. I would like to be able to go to the exposure and dial it up and go, okay, that's what was there, and then knock it back again. And that would convince me it's not been painted out. Which
Mm,
would come through if it went to the raw assessment, would be able to look at that and be able to say, okay, it is actually pretty close to what it looked like.
yeah. And I think
But the
that is one of the few cautionary tales I would give for black and white images for our competition is just be careful not to like use the burn tool in a way to eliminate things that are in the photograph. Like to completely eliminate them altogether is explicitly stated in our rules that you're not supposed to do that.
yeah,
So,
you're better off just compressing it down into the darkest tones, but still
right,
leaving it there.
right. But as far as like the composition and
It's
it's
fascinating.
it's very evocative. So I think it's a very successful
Yeah.
image. So nice job with that one, Tom. Go to the next one here. I really, really, really liked this one. Uh, Similar kind
Brilliant.
of reasons. Like I love, like I'm not totally sure what I'm looking at. Which I'm a huge fan of photos like that that make me go, "What the heck is that?" You know? Uh, and I think
This looks
again,
like it's been painted to black again, but I don't think it has in this case. I think it is a very dark water effect against very, very white. It's the protein spume again, isn't it? I think.
Mhm.
And you can see the obvious plants, bushes and things on the shoreline.
Yeah, and this is one of those like, man, imagine if these plants weren't here and it was just the white and the black. It almost looks like a dragon with stuff
Yeah.
flying off of its back. I mean, it's a very fascinating photograph. Um, I just kind of wish the plants weren't there.
Is it?
Just saying.
I'm just having a look at it here myself. It's a top-down drone shot, is it?
I believe it is. Yeah. Because you got the sun behind you and you got these long shadows, right?
What I think it gets me a little bit is I think it's been rotated. I think it's actually if you rotate it clockwise 90 degrees,
Oh,
I think that's the angle it was taken at. Or
Could be.
go back 90. So
Ah,
the island's on the left.
oh, okay, I see. Like that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely,
But
definitely.
that makes visually more sense to me now, which is what was jarring, I think, in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't really mind the bushes there. They don't have any character. I think that's the problem. If they had some personality of themselves, instead of being a little bit scrappy, it would work better.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like imagine for just a minute if it was just that white stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like none of that stuff was there. Like that would be you'd be like, "What is that?" It's a pretty cool shot. I like it. Nice job, Tom. All right. Last one from Tom. Appears to be another drone image.
This
Once,
is wonderful for its tonality, isn't it? This sense of like old master Renaissance colors going on, very subtle pastels and browns.
yeah, I think again, this one for me just like immediately doesn't do it any favors is the distractions on the edge. There's all these pebbles or stones on the right corner there. This one up here is a really major problem for me. Right on the edge, you've got this very distinct subject that's different from everything else. So obviously the eye is going to go there immediately.
Yeah,
You've done it.
the top ones and the right hand side ones are the two that are.
Yeah. So I mean, even if we were just to just carefully pop those out like
It
that,
doesn't
I
lose the
think
core of the picture, does it?
I think that would help a lot. Um, and you kind of have the same effect. You have the same color, the transitions. It almost looks like a tree
It
growing
does,
up.
absolutely. Yeah, with a
Um,
little landscape in the background, some mounds.
yeah. So I think it's a beautiful photograph. It's just a couple of minor things would have made it, taken it to the next level.
Yeah, those. I think the ones in the well, let's call it what it is. The ones that look like they're in the sky are the ones that are most objectionable. Whereas the ones on the bottom look like they're part of the landscape, but it looks like it could look like a grassy foreground, and then the horizon, and then shadowy, clouded mountains in the background. That's what I'm reading out of the picture, and
Yeah, I
all those
mean, I
work
don't mind. I don't mind all these ones. I mean, it just
exactly.
looks like
Yeah,
stones in the where the tree
and
is planted.
yeah. Whereas the ones in the sky are standing out. So you could go into those and just reduce the contrast of them, like we've talked about with the detail in the other picture. And that's probably what I would have done here. So they're
Huh.
just not as obvious because they look like they've been sharpened. So there's like a really contrasty halo around them.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Another thing
Or
too,
a,
like playing off the metaphor that this is a tree and that's the sky. Imagine if there was like a big white boulder right there, and then it's like, there's the moon. That would have been chef's kiss, right?
yeah.
Yeah, really
No,
cool,
I really like
really,
that.
really, really, really cool photo, Tom.
A great
Thanks for that.
photo.
Yeah. Okay, last but not least, we have Vivien Zheng. And I'm gonna filter for the three I kind of picked out. So we've got this, I'm gonna just guess this is Iceland, Highlands of Iceland scene here, kind
Yeah.
of kind of evoking scenes of Hanstrand a little bit. Um, I think for me, like I love the diagonals and how everything kind of pulls you in from the edges into the middle with the steam and all that's coming out. But And you've got all of these visual distractions that are just not helping you, that in our roles, you can't eliminate them. Like you've got this staircase that pulls you down. You've got another staircase there that pulls you down, this bright road or path up here. So if you could somehow find a way to reduce the saturation or contrast of those particular elements of the photograph, I think that would have helped a lot.
I think the pictures I've seen of this area that are more successful tend to be lower contrast, that bring out the pastel colors in the hills.
Mm.
And that reduces the impact of those man-made items as well. And it has been photographed a lot. We had a lot of pictures of just this area, and quite a few pictures have been published by who have we got? Tom, I say Hamstrand, and a few other well-known photographers.
Right.
They've visited this location and done them. So it's a competitive environment. But if you look at the bottom where the increased contrast that works in the background has made some very dark areas sitting on the bottom edge of the picture. And on the right-hand side, a very dark area that's also increased the saturation to chocolatey browns, which really pull your eye away from the core of the photograph.
I wonder what your thoughts are on a crop
Yeah, yeah.
of, I don't know, something
Those
like
sorts of
that.
areas are where the more interesting things are going on, and it has those subtle colors and contrasts.
Yeah. I think this works a lot better for me. It's very, mysterious. So that's what I
Yeah.
would probably look at doing is a crop of some kind. Okay. All right, the next one is kind of this really beautiful Arctic light. I'm guessing this is like Norway or somewhere similar to that. I just came back from there, so my brain is on these types of scenes. But for me, like beautiful light. I love the mountains in the distance. Like that mountain in the back there is whew, beautiful. I mean, love these. Oops, I love these chunky mountains here. For me
Classic
though,
alpenglow, isn't it? Yeah.
classic. Yeah. Well, actually, that's direct light, but we won't talk
Yeah.
about that. But
Everybody calls it alpenglow.
I know.
Let's not get
But let's
scientific.
but let's talk about something that I think some things that I think could make this photograph better. So compositionally, the photographer has chosen to give a lot of visual weight to this empty ocean, right? It just occupies a huge amount of space in the photograph and doesn't really offer a lot in terms of differentiating itself from the rest of the subject or adding value in terms of pushing you to the more interesting parts of the photo, which is these mountains in the back, which are lit up. And then all of this dark stuff in the foreground really, really is not doing you any favors because again, it's so much darker than everything else. And so, like, your eye immediately goes there because it's so, so dark.
Very
So
heavy,
for,
isn't it?
so for me, like, compositionally speaking, I would have been like, as painful as it might sound, I would not include any of the stuff on the right, and I would include almost none of the stuff on the left, and I would include almost none of the sky, and include something closer to this type of scene
Yeah,
where
those
you've
rocks on
got,
the left-hand side are quite nice, aren't they?
yeah, these rocks down here are pretty nice. I mean, now we've got a problem where this ocean on the right hand side doesn't really do you any favors. But for me, like all of this stuff in the middle was what was the most interesting for me. But what are your thoughts, Tim?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd be looking at the same thing. I'd be looking to walk to the left to try and get more interesting because it's the problem with the water there is you can see it's wind blown and it's picked up a little bit of ripple on it, which is taken away from all the reflections. Whereas on the left-hand side of the picture, you've got the less troubled water around those outcrops, which reflects that wonderful light. And you're right, it's stunning on the mountain. If you take that foreground down about halfway, so it includes the white rocks and
Yeah, something like this. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because for me, like this mountain in the back and these mountains on the left, like those those are the heroes of the photograph.
yeah,
And of course the big fellow in the middle, but like these jagged peaks back here with this dark, gloomy sky that's been lit up pink, like that's the essence of Arctic light for me. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. How can you find ways to emphasize the things that are most compelling about the photograph? And by including all of this stuff in the foreground and this huge amount of ocean, you're just detracting from the part of the photograph that's most interesting. So get
Mm.
that telephoto lens out and isolate those subjects.
It's hard as well, and it is difficult when you've got just bits of snow on a landscape that's quite dark. The contrast between the snow and the dark rocks is really, really draws your eye. And unless what it's drawing your eye to is a key part of the picture. It's distracting.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, even if they were to brighten up some of that,
It looks better when it's more natural.
yeah, if it was a little bit brighter in that
Then
foreground, I think,
lose a bit of that foreground and be a lot better.
yeah. Okay. Well, Tim, we did it.
Oh, one more.
Oh, you're right. One more. My bad.
Close. You've got 5 minutes left.
Okay. So this third one from Vivien, I picked this one out because well, for one, it's so different than the other two. But also, this is another image where I think it's playing off of a really nice idea. You've got rainbow created by light coming through crashing water. And then you've got these really nice basalt columns behind it. And then you've got the splashing water dripping down, and you got these nice ocean waves. For me, the crashing water on the left-hand side is like huge distraction that does not help the photograph at
Very
all.
bright, isn't it? Just pulling
And
your eye
it's
to the left.
exactly. So I feel like if we were to just crop some of that out and do something like this, voila, it already is so much more interesting, and it keeps your eye focused on all of the visual interesting parts of the photo with the rainbow, the water in the foreground that's smooth, and then the basalt columns that have light on them. I think for me, that already makes a much more interesting photograph.
Yeah, it's working out what the subject is again. I think in the original version, there's too many things going on. There's too many distractions. On the left hand edge of water, I can see why it's included because it explains the rainbow, but I don't think it's needed. And visually, it's just a little bit too distracting. So you work out what is interesting about the picture. The interesting for me is the textures in the basalt columns, the little plants, the little cluster of where the basalt columns sort of like, I know, like there's a target in almost in the middle, the water that's running off. Get in tight with those subjects. That's what the picture's about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if they would have included more of the crashing water, it could have
Yeah.
been an interesting photo, right? Like if the photo was, I don't know, something like this, where that water played more of a dominant role in the photograph, I think that could have worked. But the way that it was composed in the original, there's just not enough of it to make it
Yeah.
interesting, and then it just becomes a kind of a distraction from the rest of the photograph
Yeah,
for
just
me.
because it's so bright and contrasty, it's always going to draw the eye. So it's either the
Right.
subject or it should be excluded.
Now, if there was more crashing water on the right hand side, then I think
Yeah.
it could work because then it creates balance and harmony. So
Now we've done
now we've done it.
it.
Well, Tim,
Brilliant.
this was super fun. I'm glad we could do another one of these. We actually probably have enough people requested, or we could probably do 5 or 6 more of these if we had time, and maybe we will. But hopefully, people get value out of us doing these critiques and kind of can see how our brains work when we're doing judging, and maybe hopefully that'll help people with their submissions this year.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you, Matt. And thank you, everybody who submitted pictures.
All right.